Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. Today, before we dive into Exodus, I have an exciting announcement to make and something to share with all of you. I have a new publication to show you. Just a couple of weeks ago, it came out. This is the Illustrated Psalms in Hebrew by Glossa House Publishers. And it is a really fun resource that I co-authored with one of my students, Mark Reisner. It includes the full Hebrew text of the entire book of Psalms, paired with beautiful illustrations by Keith Neely and my own translation of the entire book of Psalms. It's especially useful for families that are Hebrew speaking and want to incorporate the reading of the Psalms into family devotions, or to individuals who read Hebrew and would like to have a devotional encounter with the Psalms, or for those who are learning Hebrew and would like to practice with the help of some visual cues. I'll show you a couple of the page spreads now. You can see there's just beautiful illustrations that go along with the Hebrew text. I did the translations, Mark did the page layouts with all of the images, and it has turned out just so beautiful. We're really pleased, and we're hoping that this is a resource that helps people engage the Psalms more fully and more often. One of my favorite spreads is Psalm 100. I will put a link in the description below so that you can click on that link and it will take you to the Glossa House website to order a copy for yourself or for someone you know who loves Hebrew. It would make a wonderful holiday gift. All right, so today we are picking things up in Exodus 12. We're going to do verses 39 to 42 and 50 to 51. So last week we skipped ahead and included some of the ritual instructions that pertain to foreigners because verse 38 talked about foreigners or a mixed crowd leaving Egypt with the Israelites. So today we're going to pick up the parts that we skipped over and end the chapter. Verse 39. They baked the dough that they brought out from Egypt, round loaves of flatbread, for it was unleavened because they were expelled from Egypt and they could not delay. They had not even made provisions for themselves. Now the sojourn of the Israelites who sojourned in Egypt was 430 years. From the end of 430 years, on this very day, all the armies of Yahweh left the land of Egypt. Yahweh watched by night to bring them out from the land of Egypt. This night watch of Yahweh is for all the Israelites, for generations. Now skipping down to verses 50 and 51. So all the Israelites did, just as Yahweh commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. So it was on that very day, Yahweh brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt by their armies. All right, so a few things for us to talk about this week. First, they are carrying kneading troughs with them. Notice that they leave Egypt with dough that hasn't been baked yet because there wasn't time to let it rise. And that unrisen dough becomes the foundation or the reason for the Feast of Unleavened Bread going forward. They're carrying trays, what would have been, the kneading troughs would have been a shallow tray that they could knead their bread dough on, kind of like a portable countertop. And they wrap these in cloth so that the dough won't get covered with the dust that's inevitably kicked up by a large crowd of people traveling together, and they carry them on their shoulders. And apparently once they get far enough away, they're able to stop and build a fire and bake the bread. When it says on this very day they left Egypt, there are a couple of different ways to understand that. Is it on the very day that is exactly 430 years after entering Egypt, or is it on that very day, on this very day that is the day of the celebration of the Passover? So if you think about a Jewish day begins at sundown and goes until sundown the next day. So they would have slaughtered their lamb at twilight. They would have celebrated the Passover meal that evening and stayed in their homes all evening. And then they left that next morning. It would have been considered the same day, that very day they're leaving Egypt. So I don't think that this phrase that on this very day or on that very day is a precise calendar notification, as though exactly 400 or 430 years elapsed, but it's that it's tying it to what just happened. with the death of the firstborn of Egypt. And it's the immediate result of that 11th sign. The departure from Egypt immediately follows the Passover night. One of the tricky things about this passage is that it says 430 years had elapsed, but in Genesis 15:13, God told Abraham that his descendants would spend 400 years in Egypt. So we have 400 or 430. Why the discrepancy? Well, it's possible. There are a couple of ways we could handle that. It's possible that the number in Genesis is rounded. It's possible that the number in Genesis only counts the years of servitude and not the years in which they enjoyed freedom in Egypt. That option doesn't work too well because Joseph lives 71 more years after his family joins him in Egypt. So if we're subtracting servitude, that leaves us with too few years for Genesis. The third option is that it includes the time Abraham spent in Egypt, or perhaps we could include the time Joseph spent in Egypt before his family got there. Or perhaps this number is the result, this number 430 is the result of roughly adding up the ages of the Levites in the genealogy in Exodus chapter 6, verses 14 through 25. If you add those ages together, you get roughly 430 years. So it's none of these completely solves the problem of this minor discrepancy. I would think rounding on one end or the other is probably a factor here. In verse 42, we're told that Yahweh's all-night vigil in keeping watch over and protecting the Israelites becomes a pattern, either for the people as they celebrate, that is, either for generations they're supposed to keep vigil by celebrating the Passover, or it becomes a pattern for Yahweh so that in future generations, as they celebrate the Passover, he will again keep vigil for them. The text could be interpreted either way. Verses 50 and 51 tell us that full obedience to these instructions ensured full participation in the benefits of God's redemptive work in Egypt. We have a very large crowd of people leaving. We're told that they leave as an army or as armies, which is interesting. Military language here and elsewhere. There's a number of places where military language is used in these chapters. Even though Israel isn't going to fight, there's only one battle in the book of Exodus, and that's with the Amalekites, who attack them unprovoked as they're camping in the wilderness in Exodus 17. So it's not as though they're on a military campaign. Not for quite some time will they be on a military campaign. But still, they leave Egypt ready to fight. They leave Egypt anticipating God's deliverance, his ultimate deliverance, at the Sea of Reeds when he defeats the armies of Pharaoh. So that brings us to the end of chapter 12. Next week, we'll dive into chapter 13, which gives us some additional ritual instructions that mirror this chapter. But for now, have a great week, and don't forget to check out illustrated Psalms in Hebrew. And if you're not aware, I also have an illustrated Exodus in Hebrew, which works its way through the entire book of Exodus, gives the entire Hebrew text of Exodus paired with my translation, and lots of fun images. So even if you don't know Hebrew, you could read the translation and appreciate the pictures, this wonderful artwork by Keith Neely. But it's especially fun if you're learning Hebrew and want a chance to practice with visual cues. So I'll put links to both of these volumes below, Illustrated Psalms and Illustrated Exodus. And I hope you have a great week.